more ado, I will ask you all to mute yourselves. And we'd like to hear actually from Darshan, from Neeta, and from Hardika. And you all can decide who goes first, second, and third. Hardika had mentioned she would like to go second. But whoever finishes third, please nominate the next storyteller. Okay, so you get a chance to just say so and so is going to tell the next story, and whoever tells the next story will nominate a teller at the end of their story. So that's
So,
all the format. Any
okay. So
questions?
Hardika is going in first? Second,
Radhika,
okay.
second, yeah.
Okay.
So Neeta, you're going first?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, excellent.
अभी ओखली में
Fine.
सर डाला है तो क्या करें? Okay. So
Okay, right.
here's my story. It's called U-turn. Do you remember the first time you cracked an egg? I remember mine very clearly. I held the egg gingerly in my left hand, and with a spoon I tapped it, but patch! The slimy, gooey remains of the egg yolk just slipped through my fingers onto the kitchen counter. And the oil in the pan was smoking up to the chimney. Is breakfast ready? My younger brother said as he walked inside the kitchen. Ari, you don't know how to? He inspected the mess and then said, no problem. Let's start from the beginning. You see, being a daughter of an overprotective mother for 21 years, I was sheltered from the kitchen fires. And then my mother fell sick and she had to go to Mumbai for her treatment. I was called back home from Delhi to Bokaro and unceremoniously handed a bunch of keys. In a snap, from being an ambitious and studious student at Delhi University, I became the lady of the house in a snap. Food was never something which I actually enjoyed much beyond just satiating my hunger. And in school, when I had to choose between accounts and home science, I picked up accounts. And surprisingly, I was the only girl in that class. Well, now my life of a carefree young person was dissolving in the pot of dal. And my dreams of finishing my post-graduation was getting crushed in the pepper mill. Kitchen disasters became an everyday routine for me. Every day there would be some horrors facing me in the kitchen. Some days the onions would burn crisp. Another time the milk would boil over. Once the oven caught fire, my rotis never came out soft and round like my mother's. And the gravies were always insipid and watery. One day, after an exasperating day in the kitchen and a hot cup of coffee, my analytical mind began to look out for a solution. Well, cooking couldn't be that hard, right? A recipe is just a series of planned steps. So what should I do? Befriend the kitchen. Go to the library and get some recipe books. Well, in those days, we didn't have Google Baba, we didn't have Ranveer Brar and Nigella with their fancy cooking videos. And asked my mother's friends for their foolproof kitchen tips and recipes. And last but not the least, have patience. If not, cultivate patience and hang on to patience. And that's what I did. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, and slowly and painfully, I started mastering the family classics of Baigan ka bhatta, Sindhi cookies, and Sindhi curry. Well, Baigan ka bhatta, was my favorite, all-time favorite. But the first time I tried to cook it, I had to just put it in a packet and quietly throw it in the dustbin. So the next time I thought about Baigan ka bharta, I quickly called up Rama auntie and took her recipe. And she also gave me a tip of roasting the eggplant with cloves of garlic and later cooking it in mustard oil. So with Shanta, my help and my shadow, we went to the Sabji Mandi And first of all, I scolded my regular vegetable vendor and told him that he was responsible for the failure of my began ka bharta. He said, "Are Didi, you didn't listen to me last time. I told you the best eggplants are very live, irrespective of their size." Okay, okay, I said. And then I trudged to the grocer's. Grocer was a nice guy. He tried to please me by resourcing all kinds of weird ingredients straight out of Talla Dalal's book. Methi seeds, coriander seeds, black seeds, white seeds, I don't know, so many seeds, and dals of all kinds, pink dal, masoor dal, yellow dal, split dal, whole dal. I don't know what I would have done without these three people. And there were two more at home, my father and my brother. So in the evening, that evening when they were enjoying a hot meal of began ka bharta and hot rotis, I was very pleased with myself. You know, it was the same feeling that I used to feel when I would crack a very difficult differential calculus problem. Well, I would forget my problems when I would be in Rama Auntie's kitchen. You know, she knew how to add beauty to her dishes merely by her presence. And I heard such beautiful sounds in the kitchen, which you can only hear in the kitchen, by the way. The sizzling of the kebabs in the oil, the crackling of mustard seeds, the hissing of the oil when you pour it over the coconut chutney, and the sound of the wooden spoon while you're beating a dough for the cake, and the aromas, the freshly ground mint chutney, the roasted besan, and hot cake straight out of the oven. One day, my father's uncle came home for lunch on a very short notice. So the only thing I could quickly rustle up was a simple home food. And when I was in the kitchen, I heard my brother telling him that, you know, uncle, after a very long time, I'm having some normal food. Uncle smiled. He didn't get the joke. But when he was leaving, he blessed me and he asked me, "Do they teach you cooking with mathematical statistics at Delhi University?" I was surprised and touched by his words. He was someone who barely spoke. Well, university. I miss those days. Tears came in my eyes. And what do you say about those beautiful days in the university? But at this moment, I could not see any U-turn. My mother came back, and in her honor, I made besan ka laddus. And my mother took a bite and said, "Beta, oh, it seems you have put all your love in these laddus. They are divine and delicious. And this is the first time I'm having a laddu which is going crunch, crunch, crunch. Actually, I put normal sugar instead of castor sugar." And then she said, "By the way, you look a little different. Have you changed your hairstyle or something?" I said, "Yes." And I just smiled to myself. Thank you.
So thank you, Neeta. And okay, Hadika, let's hear from you.
Okay. Am I audible? I remember the first time I met Abba. Vikram and I had decided to get married. My father had still not agreed for this relationship, but still, since I was clear of my intentions, I decided to go and meet my prospective husband's maternal grandparents. I was a little nervous the first time I went over there, going alone. And it was like way back in 2006, I think. But they were there, sitting there, smiling, ready to welcome me. Was seated on his chair in a pristine white, pure white kurta pajama, looking at me. He didn't talk much. He didn't ask me anything. But when it was time for me to go, he just told me, "Don't you worry. Once your father meets me, he will agree to this marriage." And that is what actually happened. Once my father met him, the marriage did happen. In the few years that I have known him, he taught me a lot. He started off from working in a small electronic shop and then based in Nagpur, and then he had a small industry in Gondia. He taught me about managing finances. There's this one incident which is our family story. So Vikram wanted to buy a bike. Abba agreed to pay him to give him the money, but not before he had this conversation with him. He told him, "How much do you think you will save once you start earning?" Vikram gave him a rough amount. He did a reverse calculation and then he asked him, "So this is what it is. I am giving you your 2 years of savings in one go. Always remember that." He has taught us many things. He taught me to be punctual. Once I asked him, once I told him, "Abba, we have to go at 5 o'clock." He said, "5 o'clock means what? Do you want me to be ready by 5 o'clock? Or do you want me to start getting ready at 5 o'clock? Or do you want me to be seated in the car at 5 o'clock?" So that was the precision of detail that he had. And if it's 5 o'clock, he would be seated in the front seat of the car at 4:59. Once the ignition starts, the first thing that he would do is look at the petrol tank and say, "Petrol aaya na, mi dhakka nahi lavnar." Meaning, I hope there is sufficient petrol. If the vehicle goes dry, I am not going to push it. He was furiously independent. Till the age of 85, he used to wash his own clothes and starch them by himself. Once out of, I just asked him, "Abba, should I starch it for you?" He asked me, "What will you do? Will you put the sleeves first or will you put the shirt inside the bucket first?" I was like, "Wasn't it supposed to be the same thing? It's supposed to go down like this, right?" To that he said, "No, no, the sleeves needs more starch. They need to go in first. 5 minutes after that, the shirt needs to go in." After that, I decided it's better to let him do his things and help him when he asks for it. He had a strange aura, There were whenever he used to come to Pune, there were people who used to come to meet him from everywhere. Not only relatives, but friends and acquaintances also. I remember an incident. There was a couple who were pretty, like almost of his age, 80 plus age. That come specially traveled from Mumbai that come to meet him. They stayed there for an hour or so, and the same day they went back to Mumbai. I remember asking this to Vikram that day. If I do live to be 80, will I at least have one person who will come, take so much of effort and come to meet me? I am still like, I hope I find an answer to that someday soon. But then, we were friends also. He's supposed to be my father-in-law, maternal father-in-law. That relation itself is a orthodox relationship. But then we were often, he used to call me and tell me, "When you go out now, get me a samosa or a vada pav. But don't tell anyone that this was my idea. Huh? Tell that you wanted to eat and you got one for me." And after a few days, it would be either butter chicken or mutton sauji or some sweet. Our home was like a mini sweet mart whenever he used to be there, with lots of mithais, farsans, and everything stocked up. He had a beauty routine. He had a range of multivitamins, body lotions, Ayurvedic medicines, and perfumes, and 7 pair of pure white kurta pajama, which were always starched. Once I'd gone to the parlor for a full day session. 9 o'clock I went, I came back at 6. He made me sit down and he asked me, "What all did you do? How much did you pay?" And then he pulled my cheek and he said, What's the use of you paying so much money? Look at mine. Mine are softer than yours. He would even oil my hair for he would even oil my hair, give a chumpy to me. He's but with age his health started deteriorating. And then he started forgetting things, stopped recognizing people around him, but he would recognize us. There were times when he would forget his last meal and he would be hungry again. But then we he has taught us uh, so many things. The day he passed away, all his three daughters were by his bedside, and as promised to him, nobody shed a tear. None of the Hindu rituals after rituals were performed. That day in the evening, as I sat on the besides the swimming pool in our society, I looked up and I saw this white owl perched up on the loft, sitting there, looking at me. Have you ever felt that this is meant to be? This is something that is talking back to you. It is meant to happen. I still feel that it was Abba who was sitting over there telling me, bye, till we meet again. I would be lying if I say that I miss him because I know he's still here around us spiritually, looking at us always. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hadika.
Thank you.
Lovely story, very touching. Okay, Darshan, you're up next. So let's hear from you.
Am I audible clearly? Okay, I'll take it as yes. Trusting the universe. I have this odd habit of carrying odd number of bags. 5, 7, 9, 11, and sometimes even 13. I have this huge red bag stuffed with books and clothes. I have this handbag for all my hair products, hair creams, hair blower. I have this tote bag for my blankets and shawl. I have this neck pillow eternally lying in my neck whenever I'm traveling. And there's this bag of essentials in which I carry my Kindle, headphones, passport, and wallet. After taking all these things, when I reached Delhi, I realized that all the meetings were cancelled. I had a long weekend waiting for myself. Jan was a tough month for me this year. And so I just decided that because all the meetings were cancelled, I wouldn't schedule any more meetings and I'll go somewhere. Without thinking much, I just booked tickets for McLeodganj. This was my first solo travel. I thought I'll find peace when I go there. As soon as I opened my eyes on the morning when I reached McLeodganj, I could see this beautiful mountains on either side. There were shades of green and sun was shining bright. The sky was pink. And I thought that maybe this is the time when I find peace. But the days turned into a jungle gym. I started to putting all the checkbox to all the places one must visit when they reach McLeodganj. And I visited Shiva Cafe, Illiterati Cafe, Bakshunar, and I also did a Triun trek. I went into those snow-clad mountains of Dholadar range to feel peace. But because I was planning so much that when I reached on the day 3, I realized that I hadn't found my peace. And so over the breakfast conversation, I asked my fellow travelers, all the strangers, that which is the place where it's have most beautiful scenery. And they said Sunset Cafe. So I put it on Google Maps and started walking. It was a 7-mile journey and I didn't want to spend on travel. So I started walking. Google Maps and local helped me to reach some remote forest. I could see there was road on one side, but it was inaccessible and there was a valley on the other side. I couldn't go back because I had a bus to catch in the evening. So only way was to go forward. I kept following the horse shit and Google Maps and somehow the forest met the road. By the time I was on the road, I just hoped that someone would pick me and drop me to the Sunset Cafe. I kept walking, 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 and looking behind, and all these cars would just pass me, but nobody would wait. As soon as I reached, as once, mummy, as soon as I reached I kept on walking forward, and all of a sudden, uh, there was still no help. And as soon as I reached Sunset Cafe, I realized that it was nothing like a cafe you imagine a city like Mumbai. It was just nothing but a fancy tapri, a local you find in a city, a roadside uh, tea stall you find in a city. It had a beautiful place to sit and a view which was mesmerizing. There were these hills on both sides, and there were shades of green which were flowing in. The sun was bright. There were these small houses which you could see at distance, which were made up of all the colors you could see in the world. I thought this is the place where I'll find my peace. And I started talking to the owner. We spoke for some time, and he said something that isn't peace supposed to be found within? And that bursted my bubble. He was right that the peace is supposed to be found within, and there's no external peace which would last longer. I quickly decided to move from there and walk towards my hotel. By this time, the scene had changed. As I started walking, it started pouring. It wasn't raining, it was actually hailstorms. There were these bullets of ice falling on me. I quickly removed my shawl and wrapped around me. The beauty of hailstorm is that they don't make you wet. It just keeps falling on you, and then they just fall on the ground. But because of them falling on ground, the road is slippery, and McLeodganj is a lot of smooth stones. So walking downhill was a very difficult ride, and I was desperately hoping a cab or a someone would just come and pick me and drop me to hotel. But to my disappointment, there was none. I kept walking, tiptoeing, one step at a time, and in 2 hours, I finally managed to reach hotel. I quickly took a shower and packed my bags, and I was about to leave. But I wanted to desperately reach Mumbai, and at the same time, I wanted to stay back and just be there because I was in love with this place. And so I just thought that for the last time, I should say all my goodbyes to the snow-clad Dholada range, which I could see at distance, and this unmade houses, which I could see on the roads, this kids playing around, this under-constructed buildings which were there. There were these fluttering flags around me, and everything just kept saying that don't go, and yet I wanted to go. There were these cafes which were calling me to stay slightly longer, and I just hoped that someone would just pick me and take me back to Mumbai. I kept looking behind because walk was now more tiring. And I hear the sound of bullet bike, which is so disappointing in a city like Mumbai. It irritates you, but at that day, at that point in time, it felt like music to my ears. I just looked around and I saw this man. We looked into each other's eyes and we didn't say a word. But there was this conversation which was made. He stopped his bike, and before I could say anything, he asked me, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "I want to go to the bus stop." He said that I'm not going there, but I don't mind taking this detour. And I was just so happy to have found him. I put all my luggage and I sat on top of that bullet. In that moment, I just looked at those mountains and that universe to have fulfilled my wish, because I'd found my God of small rides, my God of small things would come there to pick me and drop me to the bus stop. As soon as sat on the bus and started going towards to Dehradun, and from there to McLeodganj, I was going down the hill, and I kept on reminding so much love the strangers had given me. The universe had fulfilled me in all this way, and I quickly started planning my next trip. Thank you so much. This is my story.
Okay. Thank you, Darshan. All right. So you get to nominate who goes next.
My all-time favorite, I guess, Tanisha.
Okay. Tanisha, let's hear from
Thank
you.
you. I'm flattered, and it was a very beautiful story. Thank you so much, Darshan. So, do you remember those lemon drops from your childhood? You know, those who come in different colors, and every time you had them, you felt like you're tasting a new flavor, until that friend of yours, the smart friend of yours, came and told you that actually they are all the same. They are just colored in different food coloring. Yeah, that day I grew up. You see, looking at me, you will think I'm such a bubbly girl, but reality is I'm desperately lonely, and I was lonely when I was in school as well. So Well, once again, on a very lonely day, I was sitting in my class, looking out of outside the window, and just making beautiful stories in my head, like what will happen if my school just got a terrorist attack. Just normal school shit, normal school stuff. When I heard her voice, uh, hello, I am new here. Is this seat taken? Did I just made a new friend? I mean, this is how making friends feel like, right? I said this to myself. I looked at her and said, yeah, please have a seat, have a seat. I'm Rashmi. I recently moved here from Chhattisgarh. My father is in army. Yes. I was not able to start laughing, start chuckling. After all, I made a friend after so many years of struggling with friendship. And then that's how me and Rashmi became friends. I used to talk to her all the time, all the time. And she used to tell me stories about Rajasthan and Kashmir. I mean, I have heard about them and I've read about them in the book. But every time she talked, it felt like I was in a fairy world. And when she stopped talking, her eyes would make a conversation. Some people just have those eyes which just talk so much without saying anything. She had one of those. I used to spend my hours and hours talking with her. I used to spend my hours and hours thinking about her. We used to make notes together. We used to be so close together. And we used to spend all our time just together. Until one day, just another school day, when we were sitting for lunch, she told me that her father was transferred to another city and that she was going that year. I was hurt, but mostly I was just alone now. She left that summer and I was back in school, sitting alone on my desk, but now I was not able to imagine any terrorist stories. While I was sad, while I was just in pain, someone decided to check on me and ask me, what happened? I lost a friend, I said with a very, very heavy voice. Losing a friend doesn't feel like that, but losing a lover does. Losing a lover? I said, to be honest, I was quiet, but all the angels from heaven was singing to me and telling me that this is the thing, and I wanted to run. I wanted to run to the bus station and hug her and tell her and kiss her. But by the time I was thinking about it, she was in another city, another school, asking another girl if the seat was taken, and I was just sitting there. In today's time, I find myself stuck in a homosexual conversation where both the parties make extremely valid points and they just looks at me and ask me for my opinion. And to be honest, all I can say is they all taste the same. They are just colored in different food coloring. Thank you so much. That's my story.
Okay. Thank you, Tanisha.
Yes, I get to choose, right?
Yeah.
I'll choose Sunita.
Thank
Okay.
you, Tanisha. May 2012, I'm on a flight from Kathmandu to Lukla. It's the first day of our Everest Base Camp trek. Now, I want to tell you, even to this day, I don't know why I went on that trek. It wasn't supposed to be for the adults. It was supposed to be for the children. Siddhant had just turned 17. He had finished his 11th grade. All his friends were going to, the next year, were going to move to colleges in different parts of the world. And they decided that they want to do something spectacular. And so Everest Base Camp it was. But when did the parents get into this entire trip? I have no recollection of. But there we were on that flight in Lukla, the world's most dangerous airport. If somebody had told me that before I went on that trek, I would have never been there on that trek. But there we were at Lukla. The kids were off, started the trek off all on their own, and the parents followed behind, trying to keep their own pace. My Siddhant was happily walking along with his friends. It's always so nice to see him like that, with that sparkle in his eye. We saw very little of it at home. For us, it was always defiance that we got to see. It was also one of the reasons why I didn't actually want to come on a trek or go anywhere on a holiday. I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face the world. But there we were, walking in these beautiful surroundings. There were rolling hills. Day one of the trek was really easy, I want to tell you. It was from Lukla to Pakding, which was at 2,600 meters. It was all downhill, so it was very easy. There were beautiful rocks on either side. All of them, there were Buddhist prayers that were etched on the rocks. It was lovely, and the times that I got to spend walking with the parents when I could keep pace with them, we spoke about everything inconsequential, and that worked just fine for me. The times that I was walking by myself, my thoughts were filled with my firstborn, my Siddhant. What a wonderful child he was, really. I mean, when he was born and he began to speak, there was no baby talk with Siddhant. When he started speaking, it was grammatically correct English. And it just went on from there. He topped his school and he was academically brilliant. He was part of the tennis team. He was part of the football team. He was, a great quizzer. He was part of the quiz team in school. It was just everything was perfect about my son. I mean, when I'm telling you this today, it still brings such a big smile to my face because it brought us such great joy. That evening when we reached Pakding and we were settling down in our tea house, I looked out for my Siddhant. And there he was with his friends, happy. And I was so glad. That's the way it should be. And I let him be there, and I retired for the night. The next day was the trek to Namche. So it was from Pakding to Namche, which was 3,500 meters. Now, we knew that this was a tough day of the trek because it was very steep. And this was the first time where we're going to feel the pressure of the altitude. There was going to be less oxygen that was there. It was an 8-hour trek, but I was really excited about it. I'd seen pictures of Namche Bazaar, and it was beautiful. It was a little town that was right along the edge of the mountain, and it looked so picturesque. I was really looking forward to that trek. It was a beautiful day. The sun was out. The hills were green. The air was so fresh. You could hear the gurgling of the Kumbu River. We went across rope bridges. The rhododendrons were in bloom. It was just the kind of day that would make anyone smile. But somehow that didn't happen for me. That day I spent a lot of time on my own, walking by myself. And my head was filled with thoughts that I had been trying to push away all along. How could somebody fail their 11th grade? Who fails a 11th standard exam? I mean, what was my Siddhant going to do? Which college would give him admission, and how could my Siddhant fail a 11th standard exam? His school had actually told him that he had to leave. He couldn't continue in that school because he had failed the exam. How was I going to face my in-laws, my own parents, and tell them about what had happened? It was just, my heads were just filled with all these thoughts, not knowing what was going to happen once we got back home. And I didn't realize that at this time, the walk had already become very, very steep. I could barely breathe. The oxygen, the altitude was getting to me. And at one point, my lungs felt so tight, I thought I was going to die. I just couldn't breathe at all. The Sherpa that was there with me made me sit down. Chetan was there with me, and he tried to help me as well. They gave me some water to drink, but nothing sort of seemed to help. All the others had already, gone by. I was the last that was there. The children, of course, were walking way up in front. Just then, a Sherpa came by with a mule, and he offered to take me to Namche Bazaar. You see, in those parts, there's no way to get from one town to another apart from walking. It was so fortunate that Sherpa was there with the mule. And while that seemed like a great idea, I was a little worried because how was I going to get onto that mule and go with some stranger to a little town that I didn't even know of? It wasn't something that I felt very comfortable about. And I looked up at one point, and there was my Siddhant. There was my Siddhant talking to the Sherpa, and he convinced his father and the Sherpa that he would stay with the mule and take me to Namche Bazaar. There I was on the mule trotting along, and my son running along with the mule. And I kept thinking in my head, no, you're not supposed to run. You're not supposed to be running in these parts. And all I could hear was, don't worry, Ma, we'll get there. That evening at Namche Bazaar, as I lay down, I looked out for my Siddhant before I retired for the night. And there he was, chatting with his friends, happy, just the way that he should be. It's been 8 years since that trek. The young man has now become a lawyer and is working in Bombay. That night when I lay down in Namche, I felt happy. And I finally felt that great weight lifting off me because I knew that I hadn't failed as a parent. That those exams didn't matter at all. That what we had done was brought up a loving, caring child. And we can see that 8 years hence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sunita. Lovely. All right, who goes next?
Mary?
Okay. Okay, Mary.
Okay, here we are. I've called the story Recrafting Our Interiors. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I told my mother, you know, when I get married, for the reception, I'll serve kanyi. Now, for those of you who don't know what kanyi is, it's basically a rice-based porridge. And it's a poor person's meal, and it's served everywhere in the world. You will find it wherever there is a rice-based cuisine. In the Syrian Christian community, it's served after a funeral to friends and relatives who come for the funeral, or at church after Good Friday service. But the kanyi also in the Syrian Christian community is served with a coconut chutney, a mung bean preparation, and if you're lucky, a spiced buttermilk and some mango pickle. This meal is not only delicious, it's a very satisfying meal. It's like all your cells are dancing with joy. But more importantly, in my head, I was culturally aware that getting married was a huge thing. And only kanyi could be served at that event. I'm at my first job in Bombay. I'm spending a weekend with my sister and her family, 3 nephews and her husband. And my sister tells me in the afternoon, look, why don't you go with us? We're going to visit a friend of ours, and a couple are coming there. And they have a son in the United States who's an engineer, and he's going to be coming, and they'd like to meet you and see you. And so I agreed to go, but she insists that I wear her gold bangles and a gold necklace. I do so reluctantly. We're at the Mahim Causeway apartment. We're early. My nephews and I are guided into the second bedroom while the other adults are in the front room. Tea and snacks are served. And then we return home. And I'm quite upset. I'm very angry because nobody talked to me. My nephews and I entertained ourselves in the bedroom. So I approached my sister and gave her back her jewelry and said, I'm never going to do this again. because I felt totally humiliated. It was like being taken, like a cow being taken to the market to be sold. A few months later, my mother wrote to me and said, look, there's this friend of ours. He's an old acquaintance, actually. He has a son who's an engineer in Belgaum, and he's keen on getting married to you. Would you meet him at your sister's place one weekend? And I said, okay. I had seen the young man in his mid-teens. He had come over to our home. When my brother-in-law introduced us, and he left the room. And so he was there and I was there, and there was a long silence. He was very shy. I had to initiate the conversation about his journey and where he was staying and things like that. That night he had dinner with us, and he went home to wherever he was staying. And I wrote to my parents and said, I'm not ready to get married. I need 2 years. And I used the whole question of doing a PhD as a way to block the whole conversation. But I said I was open to corresponding with him and getting to know him. So in over a week, we would get one letter and I would be able to send the reply. This went on for 5 or 6 weeks. There was nothing much in those letters, but then all of a sudden it stopped. A couple of weeks later, my mother wrote to me and said, is he still corresponding? So I said no, and I was surprised that she knew about it. And the next letter, she asked, do you know what the reason is? And I said, I don't know. Then in her third letter, she said, well, they changed their minds. That year, I went home for Christmas. And my mother told me that that family had decided that this young man would get married to a woman who had offered a larger dowry. I shrugged my shoulders and moved on. 2 days later, I get a Christmas card from his mother, and she says, she inquires about the family and about my well-being, and then suggests whether I would be open to reconnecting with her son. I found myself with ease saying, no, thank you. About a year later, I was still in Bombay working, and I was living in Baikla. And further down the street, by a series of pure accidental events, I met and got to know a young Australian man. He was 2 years younger to me. And after about 3 months of knowing each other, meeting occasionally, things like that, he wrote a 3-page letter to me and said, asked me if I would marry him. And I was open to the idea because I found he had introduced me to books authors that I had never heard of, Lauren Isley. He introduced me to popular music, Jesus Christ Superstar. This is 1971, 72. And had a global perspective on many issues, and our discussions would be wide-ranging and interesting. To my surprise, he decided to go and visit my parents. I think he wanted to genuinely display that he was really interested in me. And so he made a whole long, complicated rail trip to Karigiri. Even today, it's a complicated rail trip. And he stayed overnight, had dinner with my parents, and turned up in a suit. Now, my parents are very simple people, and to have a person turn up in a suit was quite a flabbergasting experience. They didn't know what to do. So we continued with our choice of wanting to get married and things like that. And then, since I knew this was a huge decision on my part, I decided to spend a year in the United States. Borrowed money from my parents and bought a ticket and left for the US. Again, our connection was mainly through correspondence. And all of a sudden, everything stopped. A few weeks later, I get a letter from him saying that it's not on. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath me. I had taken this whole step all on my own, and I was sure that things would work out beautifully. Friends moved in and supported me, and I had beautiful, engaging work to do, to which I gave my passion. In spite of all of this, I still regard that connection with a positive regard. It opened up job opportunities, work that still amazes me, that I have never dreamt I would ever be able to do. Then, but it shifted my perspective. I did get married. We have 2 children. At our wedding, we served mutton biryani, cooked by Kuldabadi cook. And life is generous. All is well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Lovely. Oh, who goes next? I think we have Divya, Chetan, Sheetal.
Chetan?
Okay. Okay. Right, Chetan.
Thank you, Mary. Okay. So, Monsieur Lamour was a tall Frenchman, and he wore a long black coat that made him look like a character out of the movie Matrix. Now, Monsieur Lamour was the principal of a public school in Paris, in the 14th district. And Sunita and I were sitting in front of him in our broken French, explaining to him that we had come from India to Paris for 1 year, and we had our son with us, our 8-year-old son, Sid, and he didn't speak a word of French, so what were we going to do? And Mr. Lamour, in his eloquent French, reassured us and said, bien sûr, the French public school system is designed so that every child can attend school. You please don't worry. We will teach him French while we teach him maths and science. Just be rest assured. And you can leave now. I will escort Sid to his classroom. But worried we were. And as we stood up to go, Siddhant began to panic and said, don't leave me. I don't want to go to the school. Don't leave me and go. Mr. Lamour came and stood behind Sid and placed his hands on Siddhant's shoulders, partly reassuring and partly restraining him, and signaled to us to leave. We turned and we walked away despite Siddhant's fervent pleas. And then as we reached the door, Siddhant broke free and ran after us, and Mr. Lamour ran after him. And just as the door closed on us, the last glimpse we saw was my 8-year-old, normally very gentlemanly son was on the floor grappling and wrestling with Mr. Matrix. What had we done to our children? I had just got admission to an MBA program in Paris. It was an institution that was 250 years old and that had had several Nobel laureates who'd been through it. I was already 38. If I didn't take this chance to do my MBA, no other chance was going to come my way. So I had to take the opportunity. We had 2 sons. Siddhant was 8 and Veer was 5. And the big question was, should we uproot them from their school in Pune and take them all the way to Paris and put them in a school in a city which is totally alien to them, where they don't speak the language, they don't eat the food, just for 1 year? And after that, bring them back, back into Pune, where they have to readjust to their school, they have to catch up with the curriculum that they have mixed. Was it too much to put them through? Could we just leave them with Sunita's sister? They'd probably be happy being with their cousins. And this was a question that had tormented us so much. And on that moment, as I saw my Siddhant wrestling with Mr. Matrix, I began to worry, saying, did we do the right thing? My younger son, Veer, had it a little easier. He went to a play school where there were no studies. So, it really didn't matter. But yet everybody there spoke French, and he didn't speak a word of French. When we left home to go to school, it was 7:30 a.m. It was pitch black outside. And Veer whined to us and said, Mama, why are you taking me to school at night? But school he had to go to. And he went. That night he woke up in the middle of the night crying, saying, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. And that haunting feeling that we had psychologically damaged our children continued to haunt us. One night at dinner, Sid asked me, Dad, why did you bring us here? Why did you take me away from my friends and my school? And I told him, Beta, we have to learn to be citizens of the world. We should be ready to pack our bags and go anywhere and eat any food and learn any new language. That's really what growing up is all about. But he wasn't impressed. And then, trying to excite him, I told him, I'm doing my MBA now in Paris. I might get a job at Nintendo. Imagine you'll have so many video games free to play for. But we'll have to move to Tokyo. We'll have to eat sushi and we'll have to learn Japanese. Well, if I thought I was exciting him, I had totally the reverse impact on him. Tears welled up in his eyes and he looked at his mama saying, is he serious? Anyway, 3 months passed. And after 3 months, Siddhant started speaking such fluent French. While we were so proud of his vocabulary and his grammar, we were positively jealous of his pronunciation. The way he rolled his R's when he said croissant, oh, it made me green with envy. And Sunita and I had been trying for years to speak French like that. The younger boy, Veer, found a fellow partner in crime, a young American girl in his class, Madeleine, who didn't speak any French either. So the two of them formed an English-speaking society between themselves and kept each other entertained. They also had 2 other friends, both of whom were called Thomas in French. And Veer started getting invited to go for play dates to their home. Veer didn't speak a word of French. Neither of the Thomas spoke a word of English, but I guess when you're 5 and 6 years old, it doesn't matter. A year had passed. It was now time for us to come back home. I had finished my MBA. I was interviewing for jobs. So over dinner, I sort of needled Sid and said, so Sid, what if I get a job with Nintendo? We can get a lot of video games to play, but we'll have to move to Tokyo, eat sushi, and learn Japanese. And remembering where this conversation came from, Sid looked at me and smiled and said, okay, let's go. It'll be fun. We landed back in India. We drove back from the airport all the way to Pune. And as we entered our housing society, all the kids, our neighboring kids, were playing down there. They were excited to see their friends. As soon as the car stopped, they got out of the car and they ran out to play with their friends as if they'd never been away. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chetan. Agree. All right. Choose somebody to go next. Divya
Sheetal?
and Sheetal. Okay, Sheetal, go take it.
Okay. It was the summer of 2014. I was 16 years old. I was volunteering in a Montessori school, a kindergarten school. I would sit at the bus stand, wait for my bus to arrive to take me to school. The joy of punching my ticket into the machine was something that I would look forward to every day. I would reach school and meet the children, and I'd be happy and excited to be around them. I was living in Zurich, alone, away from my family for 3 months. Things were okay, things were all right. But after a month, I started feeling alone. I started feeling lonely. I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't know the language. I didn't know how to talk to anyone. I missed home. I missed my family. I missed India. I missed the loud horns of the bikes and cars and the rickshaws. I missed India. I missed people yelling at each other. The next day, I sat at the bus stand waiting for my bus. It wasn't exciting anymore to punch my ticket into the machine to get onto my bus. I got onto my bus and sat there alone. I watched people having conversations and talking, and I wished that I could be part of a group. I wish I could talk to someone like that. When I reached school, I went straight to my classroom. Something had happened that day in my classroom. A little boy named Julian. I noticed that nobody wanted to play with him. Nobody wanted to be with him or be friends with him. When the teacher asked everyone to make a group of 3, they left Julian. They didn't want to be with Julian. Julian watched everyone making groups and laughing. He sat there alone. I looked at Julian. And before the teacher could say anything, Julian got up and he started crying. He ran out of the classroom. I looked at him. I ran behind him and I went to look for him. I found him in the teacher's locker room. He was sitting on the ground and crying, curled up like a small ball. I sat down next to him, nervously saying, "Hi, Julian." He didn't look at me. He didn't even lift his head up. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him that it's okay, Julian. But I didn't know how to talk to him. I didn't know the language. So I sat there with him in silence and just looked at him. After a while, I spoke to him in English and told him that my name is Sheetal and I'm from India. My family's all the way back home and I miss them. Julian lifted up his head and looked at me with his big brown eyes. And then I said that I miss my dog. I miss Cody. He's all the way back home and I wish I could be with him. And Julian smiled and he rubbed the snot out of his nose with his sleeve and smiled at me. I noticed that Julian was feeling much better. We got up and he held my hand and we went back to class. The days were good. Julian would be so happy to see me at school and I would be happy too. I noticed that Julian was more confident. He made friends. He was in groups and he could talk to people. He was happy. And I noticed that I was feeling happy watching him being happy. I noticed that I was confident as well. But then my time to leave had arrived. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell Julian that he's not going to see me anymore. I sat at the bus stand waiting for my bus. I was thinking, how should I tell Julian? I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to see him cry again. It would hurt me. When I reached school, I saw Julian playing with the other boys. He smiled at me and I smiled back at him. When it was time for me to leave, all the children came one by one to say goodbye and thanked me. And when it was Julian's turn, he was sitting with a group of friends. He got up and he ran towards me and hugged me. He gave me a big hug. And he looked at me and smiled. And I felt something. I felt like that smile was telling me something. It felt like he was saying, "Thank you, and I will be okay." I smiled at Julian and said, "Thank you. I will always remember you, Julian." And I hugged him, and he went back and sat with his friends. The rest of the day was good. I said my last goodbyes to everyone. I said my last goodbyes to Julian and left. The day of my departure had arrived, and I was sitting in the plane, and I realized that I felt confident. I was happy. I felt like I can connect to people even without knowing the language. Julian made me feel confident. And for Julian, he was able to make friends now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheetal. Lovely. Okay, Divya, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, let's hear you.
I haven't prepared a story as such, but listening to you wonderful people, I want to share one. It's a story of the time I almost died. I was about 15 years old, and this was my first horror movie at a friend's house. So I was very excited because when I was growing up, I was shielded from all of this. So watching my first horror movie was a big thing for me. I was sitting there right in front of the screen. We had switched off the lights, it was dark, and the movie we chose was The Ring. The movie in which this little 8-year-old girl with wet hair crawls out of the well, and then eventually she crawls out of the television and kills you. After watching that movie, so I pretended to be brave. There were scenes when the horse goes crazy on the television, and exactly at that time, her dog started jumping about in the room, which almost killed me at that point. After which there were images that I carried with me home. I pretended to be brave, and normally I was the last person to sleep at home. But after that movie, I didn't have the courage to remain in the TV room, after everybody was asleep. So I was always the first one to go and sleep on my bed. And even during summers, I used to hide under the blanket because I knew that blanket somehow is going to save me. And if I remove the blanket, someone's going to come and kill me. So even though I was sweating over there, I used to hide under the blanket. So now, 1 week later, I had healed. I thought I had healed, and I was sleeping on the bed. Now the blanket was on my chest and not on my head as it was a week before. And I was lying there. My sister, at this time, I was about 15 and my sister was about 7 or 8 years old. Exactly the age of the ringed girl. And she used to have this habit of having bath at night. So she came, and I was lying on the bed, and she came to check on me to see if I am asleep. She just stood there without saying a word, and she towered over me to see if I'm asleep. I opened my eyes because I could feel a presence. And out there, I see this 8-year-old girl with wet hair looking down at me. And that was the day I almost died. The end.
Okay, lovely, lovely, right. Okay, so the last story for today. Have we finished with everyone? I think so, no? Gone through everyone. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. My story for this evening is invisibility. Invisibility.
We can't hear you clearly, Peter.
We can't hear you, Peter. Are others also having the same
Yeah.
experience? Okay. Your voice was muffling as if the video was breaking.
Yes.
When you're talking, normally it comes nicely, but whenever you start telling a story, even last time, something happens. What is it with that audio? What?
Okay, is this better? Yeah, okay. So invisible people are everywhere. My invisible guy used to stand outside the liquor store, sad look on his face, one hand outstretched, and then one word, Saab. I used to normally just brush past him. Occasionally I would bark a maaf karo, and he would just turn look away. And at one point I realized that the word is very, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And so I began to use a gentler tone. And with that gentler tone came the realization that if I gave him a little bit of low denomination folding money, it wouldn't hurt me all that much. And on the handed over the change from my purchase, which came to over 30 or 40 rupees. I don't know what he did with it. So it didn't get it done. And then one day, I decided to do something different. I motioned him into the shop with me. The people in the shop were furious, but I am a regular customer, so they didn't get very far with that attitude. I pointed he selected something I think it was half a I moved to make my own purchase. I tapped my shoulder, my arm, and that's when I got the idea that we are going to be drinking this bottle together. But didn't we need something? Glasses, some water, maybe some snacks to go with? Apparently not. We walked out of the shop together. I headed for my two-wheeler, and he shook his head. So we were going to go somewhere that he was deciding. We walked along the road, along the tracks, all the way to the canal. And as we walked down the canal bank, at one point he turned towards the canal and disappeared. I followed him. And there, set into the side with an overhanging tree, and invisible unless you happen to know that it was there, was this little niche he had made out of road divider paving blocks of all things. And looking at it, I said, oh, that's really nice work. How did anyone manage? Because those things are really heavy. We sat there for some time watching the water. Then, with a practiced hand, he tapped the bottle, he twisted the cap, he offered a capful to the river gods, held the bottle to his mouth and tilted it back. Then he took the bottle, he wiped the mouth on his sleeve and handed it to me. I just felt disgusted, but oh well, they use alcohol to disinfect surgical instruments. So I took it, and with that bravado of college days, I held it to my mouth. And it took a good hefty slug. Oh my God, it burnt. First it burnt my mouth, then it burnt my throat, burnt all the way down to my stomach, and it burnt over there as well. I sat there, taking great big gulps of air, while he looked at me with a slight amused expression on his face. We sat there drinking together, him taking the larger gulps, me holding the bottle to my mouth like I was taking a great slug, but just letting a little bit dribble in each time. The level in the bottle got lower. The shadows got longer. Dusk began to fall. In the distance, the lights on the buildings began to come on. And very soon the bottle was all done, and it was time to go. I followed him up to the canal road, but as I reached there, this wave of nausea or dizziness hit me, and I just saw the ground come rushing up. When I came to, he was sprinkling water on my face, and I thought to myself, oh my God, that's canal water. I staggered to my feet, but my legs gave way again. But this time he was ready for me. One hand just reached out and grabbed me, and I steadied myself, holding on to his arm. And when I did that, I realized it was all solid muscle. And even in that inebriated condition, my overactive imagination began to wonder, who is this guy? Some undercover operative? Is this CID or RAW? Or maybe he's just some army guy who crawled into a bottle a long time ago and hasn't been able to find his way out. We walked home, him supporting me for part of the way, and then after some time, the alcohol in my bloodstream began to decrease and I could make it on my own. And that's when I realized that, oh my goodness, now he knows where I live. The other thing I also realized is that I've left my bike back at the shop, but in my condition, I didn't want to do anything. I left it for the next morning. The next morning, there was my bike. So my unknown drinking buddy had wheeled it all the way home, which was very generous of him, very sweet of him. But I felt kind of, it was an unsettling experience, and I just started avoiding going to that shop. Went to another place. Then that ridiculous government ordinance came out, which prohibited liquor shops within 100 meters of a highway. And the outlet that I'd been frequenting closed down. I had to go back. With great fear, I parked my bike. I didn't want to run into him again, but when I got off my bike, he wasn't there. He wasn't there the next time or the next, and months passed and there was no sign of him. I guess he had disappeared like so many other invisible people. And then one day, I had some purchases, so I had stopped on the other side of the road. And when I looked across, I saw him. There he was, outside the shop. I began to make my way towards him. By the time I reached the beginning of the road, you can see, by the time I finished crossing the road, he had disappeared. I looked around. I saw him. He was walking. And tapped him on the shoulder. And he turned around. He turned around. And he spoke to somebody. He held up his hand and said, "Oh, brother. Brother? What happened to Saab?" And in that moment, I realized what he was trying to tell me was, "Brother, I can't take your money." Yeah, Sage, will you give us one story to send us on our way?
We couldn't hear the best parts of Peter's story.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
Peter, we'd love to hear the
Just
last
at the
part.
right time, the sound went. Just
I
when we
have no
saw that
idea
man
why this
across the
happened.
street. Oh,
Would you want to
suspense.
try with Sheetal's phone?
What?
Would you want to try with Sheetal's phone, just the last part? Because everyone was so hooked, and then I could see everyone.
Like, what happened? And it went. The suspense
One
is
minute,
keeping us.
one sec. I'm getting these messages saying low system resources. So from where?
Okay.
From where
Never
would you
mind.
like me
Maybe
to go?
another time. Yeah.
Okay. 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 Let's go with Sage then.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been an absolute joy to hear your stories for the second time, and what a wonderful show. I'm sorry I'm so far below the camera. So, just thinking for a moment of what to tell. Sunita, give me a word, any word.
Silence.
Silence. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, silence. So, 20 years ago, I looked very different. I had long hair, I had hoop earrings, I had a lot of blue eyeshadow because it was the 90s. I had high heels and I had Angora sweaters. And me and my partner, Todd, we lived in suburbia with our newborn son. And we lived in a suburban house with a suburban fence, and we had an Acura Integra car, and we had a cat. The cat, her mother had distemper, so she couldn't really walk and she couldn't really think, but she was still technically a cat. And every day, Todd would go to his suburban job. Now, what I didn't know about becoming a mother is that babies are very boring creatures. They know how to poo and they know how to sleep, and that is pretty much all you would get. So every day Todd would go off to his suburban job and I would be home with the baby. And even though I loved the baby so much, even though I was so kind to the baby, I thought it was really boring and he could tell. Meanwhile, Todd, he would go to work all day and then he'd come home and he'd pop the baby in the sling and he'd go for a 2-hour walk. And when he'd come home, I would say, oh my God, 2 hours with the baby. And he would say, the baby saw the moon and he smiled. And this is not at all my experience of parenting. So then Todd gets sent away on a 4-day business trip. Now, Peter, that's like your partner going away for 20 years on a business trip. The baby is barely new to the world. 4 days is an eternity. And not only did his favorite parent go away, but he left him with me. And even though I'm so kind to the baby, I can't emphasize this enough, I think he's boring and he can tell. And so when Todd gets home, the baby is incandescent with rage. And Todd is walking around the house holding the baby and he's saying, I don't want to be this kind of dad who is home on the weekends and late at night. And I say, if I have to spend another day with somebody who can't locate Africa on a map and doesn't know who the pop group Wham is, I'll go insane. And Todd says, okay, let's do something different. So the next day he quits his job. We cash in our savings, we give away everything we own, and we move to the woods in a yurt, a canvas and wood tent. And we don't have any electricity, but we do have sitting together and watching our son take his first steps. We don't have any plumbing, but we do have sitting together and hearing our son's first word, which is, of course, Daddy. And life is good. Toward the end of the second year, it begins to snow. And at first, it's so beautiful. The snow is coming down outside. The wood stove is perking away. We have Vince Giraldi on our little battery-operated boombox. Da-da-da-da-da. But then it just keeps snowing day after day after day after day. It snows for a week and then 2 weeks. By the third week, we have run out of all food except 100 cartons of black bean salsa couscous mix. I don't know if you've ever had this. It comes from Fantastic Foods, and you boil water on the wood stove and you put it in and you mix it into a horrible slurry, and that is all we have to eat. At the end of the fourth week, we have not turned mean. We are not like Jack Nicholson in The Shining. We're just clinically depressed. So when the snow stops, we run and we get in the car and we zoom into town and we buy lamp oil for the lamps because we ran out of that too. We buy gas for the stove. We go to the library. We get all the books. And then, of course, it begins to snow again. So we have to put everything back in the car and then go back to the yurt. And I put on an audiobook for our son to listen to, and Todd is hooking up the gas because, by God, he's going to make something for dinner that does not have black beans or salsa or couscous in it. And I am pouring the lamp oil into our lamps when outside we hear a terrible sound. He was there and it scared him. We hear a terrible sound. And Todd says, that's a bear. Well, I think we all wonder who we're going to be when the apocalypse comes. Are we going to be that person who leads a band of plucky survivors to happiness? Or are we going to be the person who looks outside on the very first morning and is like, what's wrong with that lady? And goes outside and then immediately dies. And I always thought that was going to be me the second kind. But when Todd says that's a bear, I run around the yurt. I snap into action. I pull down all of the shades and I lock the door. Even though our actual tent is made of canvas and wood, we have a wooden door. So I turn the little bathroom lock, because I don't know if bears can open doors, but maybe they can. And so I turn the little bathroom lock and I order everybody to sit in the middle of the yurt and be silent. Todd and I, our hands are shaking like this, but our little boy, he's 2 now, he's like, "Is there a bear?" And we're like, "Shh, shh, shh, shh." And then we hear a new sound. It's our cat. Our cat, who can't walk very well and can't think very well and can't get away from a 2-year-old. And I leap up and I say, I have to go and save the cat. And Todd says, you have a son now, and you have to think of him. So I sit back down and we wait. And it is the longest 2 minutes of my life. And in the terrible silence that follows, there's a new sound. It's the sound of the boombox changing sides, and what's about to happen is we're about to hear, "Hello and welcome to the Children's Audiobook Hour." And when that happens, the bear is gonna hear and he's gonna come running and rip down the walls of the tent and eat Todd and then me and then our baby like a lovely wriggly dessert. So I run across the yurt and I hit stop on the boombox. And this is what we all hear. Rah! I hit play again. Rah! We learned so much living in a yurt in the middle of the woods with a newborn, but mostly we learned that if the batteries in your boombox get cold enough, then any tape you play will sound like there's a bear outside eating your cat. And now here we are, 20 years later, and we are in the middle of an apocalypse, and we get to choose who we're gonna be. I hope that we all choose to be kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Sage. Thank you so much. Lovely story. Okay, so I think we, if you just all unmute yourselves, and let's just go around, and if we could just have just one statement of appreciation, and I'll just call out the names in the order that they are on my screen. So Somnath, just a small sentence of appreciation for this evening and the wonderful time that we've had being together.
Thank you for a roller coaster ride of emotions.
Okay. All right. Who's next? Divya?
See, most of the stories I have heard before, and there were many new stories as well. But let me tell you, it was not boring at all. I enjoyed listening to these stories all over again and living it all over again. So thank you so much for making me a part of your lives.
Okay. All right. Neeta?
I don't know what to say. I mean, like Divya, even I heard all the stories once again, but it was wonderful. And yeah, I enjoyed this lovely evening. Yes,
Okay.
and thank you for being part of my life and making me a part of your life. Thank you, Sage, for teaching us how to look at our lives in a different perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Hardika?
Thank you. That is all that I can say.
Okay.
It is always interesting to listen to everyone. And thank you for making me comfortable to tell my story, being patient with me. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Shaheen.
It was an amazing evening, and thank you, all of you, for giving me a glimpse of a part of your lives which generally we do not share with other people. So it was amazing. I love you all. You're a part of my life, and I'm so happy that I was able to share one part of your life that, you know, I usually we would not be talking about. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Shaheen. Sapna, are you with us? Could you just switch on your video and let us know how you enjoyed this evening?
Yeah,
There
hi,
you are.
Peter. Can you hear me? Yes, and I just want to say thank you all. Telling your personal stories is like putting a part of your, heart out there. And so, thank you for letting me into your lives and for this wonderful evening. Thank you, and all the stories were wonderful. I enjoyed all of them.
Thank you. Chetan?
Yeah. So I think that personal stories are so personal to even present, and they're so personal to even listen to them, that there are really no bad stories. I mean, how can a personal story not be good? I mean, I just find that every story is so special, and I think this is a new experience for us. Thank you, Sage. I think the experience that we've had with you has not only given us courage to tell our personal stories, but I think it's improved our storytelling skills and our ability to edit and focus on the important parts and keep the momentum going in the story. I think all of us are much richer for the experience. So thank you so much to you, and thank you so much to everybody else who's been here.
Okay, thank you, Chetan. Mary?
Yeah, it's been a wonderful journey too, and listening to the new stories was wonderful too. Yeah, it's because of all of you, we're able to go on a journey of this nature.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Sheetal?
I feel we made a good team and we were able to open up and share and create our own personal stories. And thank you, everyone, thank you, Sage, giving us an opportunity to create personal stories.
Okay. Darshan? Thank you, Sheetal.
I feel like gulab jambu with y'all being chashni around me, which nourishes me and added so much value to my life. I literally feel like that jammu of that dark brown jammu with all of your as chashni.
Spoken like a
And
true Gujju.
and secondly, Sage, you taught us some basics which I will never forget. And I'm just really obliged that those basics are so fundamentally, seeped into me that like 1, 2, 3, 4 needs to be followed. You can't have 4 before 1, and just those basics. So thank you so much. And I'm just waiting that can we do something in 6 months and not after a year. So if it's possible, we should do in 6 months and not next whole after a year. So yeah, let's see.
Okay, thank you, Darshan. Sunita?
So I think it was a great journey, especially since we had done it so many years. We've been talking about doing published stories, and that's what we've been doing and practicing, and doing personal stories. I mean, when we started the workshop, and Sage, bear with me, I'm going to repeat what I said on the last day of our session. That when we started doing this, I thought, chalo, like any other training program, if there's one thing that I get out of it, I'll be happy. We'll go along with it and see if there's one thing. But every session there was so much to take away from, and it didn't matter whether it was a personal story or a published story. I think it's really the essence of how you say it, what you bring out, that you showed us so beautifully, Sage. So thank you so much, and it's truly been a wonderful experience.
Okay, thank you, Sunita. Elaine?
Well done, guys. It was fabulous. I had to pinch myself. I couldn't believe they were not published stories. They were done so well. Honestly, halfway through, I had to keep saying, is that not a published story? It was done beautifully. They were well done. I enjoyed every one of them. Super. And Peter, I'm going to catch up with Peter and ask her to tell me the rest of the story. Because you saw him opposite the road and then I lost it. I didn't know what happened. So I'm in a state of suspense. Absolute. Well done. It was a wonderful evening. Wonderful.
Maybe we should publish now.
Yeah.
Tanisha?
First of all, I would like to say thank you so much for listening to my story, and you guys are amazing. I'm having so much of feels right now listening to so many different stories, and I think like the whole platform of storytelling gives like such good perspectives towards different ideas about how a parent would think, or how somebody who is being wedded, like newly wedded, will think, or something like that. And I'm so happy, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences with me. I'm going to cherish this evening for a very long time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanisha. Sage?
Oh yeah. आपकी कहानियां बहुत सुंदर थे, बहुत धन्यवाद, बहुत मजा आया. So I've been listening to this class, little snippets when I walk by the door and hearing all the laughter and little pieces. So it was nice to hear the full stories afterwards. So thank you for sharing them.
Okay. You, Sage?
Oh, I'm so proud of everybody, and you all made me cry a lot of times. So I'm going to very quickly pass it to somebody else so I do not cry again. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'll just wind up by thanking all of you for being here. Thank you, especially Sage. Like Sunita was saying, this at the beginning, it looked like this dark, dangerous forest that we were entering, but you were there to take us through. Whenever any of us got lost, there were the shining pebbles on the path that helped us find our way back again. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here. And let's continue our way through the dark forest. Let's see where it leads us. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Bye.
See, Peter, we heard your last speech perfectly.
Yeah.
You start telling a story, something goes wrong.
What your storytelling
We
for
were able
that?
to hear the whole session properly. Only at the time of your story, it was like bad reception.
Peter, get yourself a real phone or a real laptop. Please, Peter.
I tried to buy a laptop. Apparently, all the laptops have gone up by 10,000 rupees because everyone wants a laptop. Anyway, so I remember what I told you about hairy green monsters when I tell stories. Now you know it's true.
Yes, I was about to suggest that there's a hairy green monster here.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
We
Everyone.
meet tomorrow
Bye,
evening. Tomorrow evening, right? Some of
Yes,
us.
tomorrow evening at
4 o'clock?
4 o'clock.
Okay. 4 o'clock.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Either.
Yeah. What plans today?
She's in quarantine. She doesn't have any plans. She's going to
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah, like he said, I'm under quarantine, so no plans today. So I'll be watching Netflix.
So what are you doing in Canada?
I had to land here because of my visa status.
Okay.
So I had a deadline to land.
Yeah.
And I'm allowed to work here, so I'm job hunting as well.
Wow.
But I've realized I'm absolutely useless when it comes to jobs. I'll tell you why. Here, I have 4 years of teaching experience, but you need a BC teacher certificate to teach. So that is useless. And even I'm applying to other jobs like waitress, etc. For that also you need experience, which I have 0. So I'm practically useless in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Chalo, I think Chetan must be wanting to
Yeah.
say good night and leave. So thank you, Chetan.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.
So,
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.